Welcome everyone to the 2024 Western Connecticut UFO Conference. And today's talk is going to be with Mike Bara and Thom Reed. This is going to be actually be a little bit about the Ancient Aliens episode. I think it's called Taken, in regards to alien abductions
Hmm.
throughout history. And we're going to be talking about a very famous incident that happened in the Berkshires in Sheffield, Massachusetts, in the late 60s regarding Thom Reed and his family. So without further ado, Thom Reed and Mike Bara.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. This is about an episode of Ancient Aliens that we recorded. We filmed, I think, in 2019. Tom, we filmed and we went to the actual location of Tom's abduction experience, in I think 1969, if I'm not mistaken, Tommy.
Correct.
And um, Tom and I had met before. We'd worked on another show called Uncovering Aliens, and Tom has had this case covered before. But this Ancient Aliens episode wanted to focus especially on his specific abduction experience. So it was interesting because it was the first time, Tommy, I actually got to interview you about it, and I found out some things I didn't know. So we went to what is now UFO Monument Park. There's actually a monument there with a benches and things like that where people can actually see this bridge where the abduction experience that Tom had took place. And it was a very fun. It's fun for me, Tom, to do the interview. It wasn't too fun for you because I was trying to get Tom to go places in this experience that he hadn't really done
Yeah.
before. I don't think, and didn't
Yeah.
really want
You've
to
done that
go.
before too. You've
And
done that before and you didn't
unfortunately,
wrap up.
yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, some of that didn't get on the episode. But I guess what I want to do, Tommy, is start with just give us a brief 30-second overview of what happened. Now, not the whole story, maybe in detail. We'll talk about that in a second, but and then tell us about the Monument Park, which is right where the whole incident took place.
Yeah. So when Mike came down, I thought of all shows, Ancient Aliens was going to blow it out of the park, and for the most part, they did one of the better jobs of it. But a lot of people don't realize that it wasn't a one and done. I mean, we were involved in something in 1966, 67, which actually made the newspapers. And then, of course, 69, the reason that got the amount of press it did is because it was on a holiday. There's a lot of people outside in groups of people that didn't normally know each other or socialize with each other. And it was a really nice day too for September. It was a warm day. And so with that, and I guess if there's anything to be grateful for, it was that it was a holiday that so many other people could now validate what we had been talking about, which we had been seeing in the skies and that kind of thing. And so that evening, I was actually riding in a horse show at Butternut Basin, and we left early to lock up the diner in Sheffield, which is now Roberto's. And my mother decided just to take a kind of a shortcut home and over that bridge. And for a lot of people know where that park is and that bridge because a lot of you in Connecticut are pretty close to that area. And we went through the bridge, which was a lot different than it is now. When they rebuilt it, it's still a lattice bridge, but it was nothing like this now. It was old and holes between the planks, and it was like loud when you went over it. And so we were seeing light come through the floor of the bridge itself. And my grandmother was the first one to mention, it doesn't look right. It was more light than the headlights should have had. It wasn't bleeding through properly. It looked odd. And when we came down the other side of the bridge, we were going really slow because that road, as you know, it's bumpy and
Mm-hmm.
potholes, and it was even worse back then. And so when you came off the bridge, you had to go really slow or the car would bottom out. So we were going like 3 or 4, maybe 5 miles an hour. And in doing so, I was giving my brother a candy. And I talk about it all the time. I remember handing him this candy. And my grandmother turned around in the car to say, you can't give that to him. He could choke. And in doing so, she saw what looked like a round sphere. It looked like a cue ball, if you will, that put out like a little light, like a glowing light. It was crisp. It wasn't like like an orb, right? This was a crisp cylinder. And, I was young, so everything looked bigger to me. But my family has been talking about this their whole lives. So we kind of have a really good idea when we say it was like twice the size or so of a Volkswagen Beetle. That's pretty accurate. And we saw it rising up from the Housatonic River just on the left side of that bridge. And in doing so, I have said, it looked like it was coming out of the water. I don't know if it came out of the water, but it was rising from the banks, if you will. And it wasn't very far away from the bridge. And then my brother was trying to look at it and see it. And he looked out the right side for whatever reason, and he saw what looked like an orange sphere, which was much smaller. And it had like an orangey red roll to it, as he said, like an ocean wave is the way he described it. And I could see it too briefly, but I didn't see it as well as the one on the left side of me. And so as it rose up, it kind of stopped maybe 3 stories high, and these rods of light, which almost made it look like an ice cream cone for a moment,
Mm-hmm.
shot into the water. So this thing rose up, it kind of halted, fired these rods of light into the water, which were very defined. I mean, this wasn't just like a flashlight. They looked solid when they went into the water.
Yeah.
And so it formed like this V, like a sugar cone. And they retracted, and then the object started going in the direction of our car, which was going down this dirt road towards Boardman Street. And so there was a telephone pole not too far down, and my mother decided to, I'm going to pull over and see if we can get a better look at this thing, because now it's behind a line of trees. And as we were entering this little area where you could pull off, we all felt really odd. We all just, it would seem surreal. There was a tapping sound, which to me sounded like, the best way to describe it would be like if you were going down a dirt road and you had those stones hitting the bottom of your fender wall. But we were basically stopped at this point, and it was pretty intense. Almost like if you're deep in a swimming pool and someone's tapping on the side of it, that ting, 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 ting. It was like that. It was repetitious. It was weird. And the whole night was kind of weird, but that sound, the only way I can describe it is if you were in a swimming pool, and that sound, how everything's silent except for that one particular sound. And then everything just kind of went kind of surreal. We looked out the window. My mother said, like, oh my God, what is that? And in the sky, you could see what looked like, a disc. Now, something else I want to mention here too is, like I have said, there were lights from the disc, but it was more like a sheen. It was like the craft itself kind of put out like a reddish, sheen, if you will, to one side of it. And it wasn't a direction our car was going. So I kind of said towards the front of it. I don't know what the front was, but it was, one part of it. And that sheen kind of bled through the rest of the craft. So you could kind of make it out. I did not see windows. I did not see landing gear. I did not see anything but what the best way to describe the color of it, or how it appeared, was like a top of a turtle shell.
Mm-hmm.
It had what looked like lines in it, markings. It wasn't shiny and like you'd see online or something. It was kind of just old and weathered and tarnished kind of looking, maybe like a pewter that blends into like a gold and then the reddish tint. Very unique. And when Melanie Kirchdorfer did the Netflix Unsolved Mysteries, she was the first one to mention that reddish tint, because it's not something I usually talk about. But in watching this thing out the window, we did not have air conditioning. The car was running, the headlights were on, and we're staring at this thing. And then all of a sudden, it was like a flash of light. There was all these sounds of crickets and katydids, and boom. That was the last thing I remember from being in the car. And that flash of light wasn't like a 2-second thing. That I remember it being sustained for a while. I could see the radio. I could see the back of my mother's head, the car. I remember so vividly what that looked like. And it wasn't like a dome light. I mean, it was bright. And so as collectively as a family, we think that white sphere had kind of moved in that direction. And that's what illuminated the car, which you'll see on, if you watch, The Taken, there's a fairly good depiction of that, except that it wasn't really the sphere that stopped the car, but it was probably the sphere that emitted that light. And so at that point, I remember, being in what looked like an airplane hangar, where there were lights on the wall that almost looked like a fluorescent tube, if you will. So it was like where the ceiling met the wall. There's like a fluorescent tube of space, a tube of space, a tube of space. I remember sliding off some type of a table or apparatus of something. I landed on my feet. Someone grabbed my arm. It hurt. I remember that. I really remember the pain. It was hard. And I was taken out a doorway, brought down another hallway, and then laid on what looked like a table with one pedestal in the middle of it, like an autopsy table. And it raised up a little bit. An apparatus came down from the ceiling. There were two individuals, if you will, or species to my left, which is like nothing anyone else really describes. It had a head of like a football, a thin body, like a mushroom colored body. They were looking at something inside a wall, like they were staring at a wall. And there were like packs put on my body. It looked like giant raisins. And I at one point ran out a doorway, got into the what looked like an open area of like an empty Walmart. It was that big, but it was rounded with a hallway off to the top right, another hallway to the, if this was a clock, if you will, like a hallway at like 2 o'clock and another one at 5 o'clock. And then on the left, there was a wide hallway, like a highway, like you could a 4-lane highway area. So it looked like a Y inside this circle. And there were markings on the floor. I was taken back, put back on a table. I remember some bumps to the head. And I woke back up if you say woke up, however I came to or remember the inside of this hangar area again. And then I'm back in the car. Now, I remember hearing my mother's voices. My mother says she was yelling for me. I'm assuming that was her. My brother had a club foot. He remembers a lot of attention being put to his leg. When everyone was back into the car, the ignition was off, according to my grandmother. And so the car was not running, the headlights were off, the ignition was off. My grandmother and mother were reversed in the vehicle, and my brother and I were both back in the same spots with my brother's head now on my leg when I came to. My grandmother went down the road, which was really bumpy, and she wasn't used to driving a station wagon. She had a driver's license, but I said she doesn't drive. She really didn't. And so she turned around and went back to town for help. And when she got back into the old town of Sheffield, she, didn't think much. She wasn't really paying attention to the time, right? It wasn't something she was thinking of, but she had thought, they're going to be open. Everything's going to be open. There was only one store open, which was Silks. And it was almost 11 o'clock. They still own the place today. They still remember it. My grandmother walked in for help, but didn't know what to ask for help for. When she got out of the vehicle, I remember coming to myself, and I remember her walking. I could see her like over the steering wheel walking inside the store. And so I was calling my mother. She wasn't responding to me. My brother was still passed out on my leg. And so I followed my grandmother in. She went right by the clerk and walked straight to the back of the store where they had strollers and bikes. And she had her hand on a stroller, and she was slowly moving the stroller back and forth. I grabbed her hand. I'm calling her Nana, because I was shaking. I didn't know what was going on. I wasn't thinking clearly. My grandmother obviously was not herself. And we had, at that point, the clerk came over, or the guy running the register, and, are you okay? That kind of thing. And unknown to us at the time, WSBS had already gone on the air and was asking locals to, make them aware of where this object was. As the Great Barrington Police Department had gotten or heard messages over ham radio and relayed that to Tom J., who was the disc jockey, if you will, for WSBS radio. And so he went back to the radio station, opened up the lines because it had like a looping reel to reel for music, and said, "Hey, anybody out there, could you please call the radio station and tell me where this thing is we're hearing about? That we're working with the police department to kind of identify where it is." And, if we had actually made that call to the police department, this whole thing might have been a little bit different or taken a different, road, if you will. But nonetheless, the next morning when we opened up our diner, all these people were in our diner that had seen it because it was a holiday. It was Labor Day. And so we were all talking about it. So that diner became like the hub for conversation. And of course, those who worked on the space race, that made the goodwill message that was left on the moon, they ate in our diner regularly. They were from Sprague Electric. We had a lot of money being filtered into New England, Command Aerospace, right? Pratt & Whitney, Sikorsky. And of course, NASA was in Boston at the time. So a lot of money was being fed into the Berkshires to beat Russia to space. And so there was a secret space program going on at the same time. And so a lot of those ate in our diner because the racetrack, the Great Barrington racetrack, was down the road. When you're coming in are being moved there from Albany or Hartford or New York City or whatever to get these positions to work on the space race, there's not a whole lot to do there. And there certainly wasn't back in the day. And you couldn't like just tune in and listen to a rock and roll station because there wasn't any radio stations unless, you know, you listened to WSBS radio, but that was an AM station back in the day. It was basically a news station. So they'd come in, drop quarters in our jukebox. My mother would lock up the diner, and everyone that was interested in talking about this, who had seen it or was involved in it somehow, that's what our diner became, was this hub for conversation. And so that's how eventually it got inducted into state, because our diner had altered the natural progression of the community due to the talk and how it affected, the locals in Berkshire County. And so that really played a part in it. And of course, it went to the United Nations on October 2nd, 1992. And my father lost his life on the anniversary of that talk with our attorney, also Robert Bletchman, who was from Manchester, Connecticut. And at the time, we lived in Canaan, Connecticut. And my father was the first selectman, or, mayor of Canaan.
And that, folks, is the short version of Thom Reed.
Yeah.
Thom, I think there's a couple points here that are significant. Before we move on, more to the nuts and bolts. The area itself. Is like, the monument park is there where all this took place, and it has been basically. The governor signed a petition, or signed a document that says this is a historical, factual event that took place here. And it is also one of the most heavily witnessed alien abduction UFO experiences. Yeah, I guess we haven't said alien, but the beings, the creatures that you saw were the mantis types that are definitely not human. But this is the most probably well-documented abduction case out there, except for maybe the Travis Walton case. I mean, basically, you had hundreds of people that saw this object and other objects flying around that night that the abduction took place. And, it's kind of like everybody did their therapy in your diner there, your parents' diner. So what I wanted to get to next on this is to ask you, how critical do you think it is that the state has recognized this as a historical fact, as something that took place in this particular area? Is that something that makes a difference to you and helps you sort of resolve from this? Because you had other experiences, but this was the main one that you remember, right?
Yeah, I remember, all of them actually. Some of them were quite different. This one had more of a military flavor to it, if you will. I don't believe that where I was actually in a craft. I think I was taken underground somewhere. But you're right. As far as the
Yeah. Wait a minute. Let me interrupt there, because that's the thing. The area that you found yourself in when you woke up is far beyond any possible volume that could have been inside the white disc-shaped thing or any of the other objects, right? You're talking about, you think you were transported to a much bigger place, either that or it's some sort of weird dimensional portal where you went into this little tiny truck and ended up inside of a warehouse, right?
Well, that's the other thing. So the area of the Berkshires back in the day, working because they were working on the space race, and all these manufacturing companies were getting millions of dollars to make capacitors, whatever it was. There was a lot of government there to begin with, and we believe, and a lot of other people have said, historians and so on, that they have seen what looked like military personnel coming out of the woods. There was a lot of, the license plates, federal government, whatever, because of what was happening in the area. So I think it was easier for the state itself to say, look, you're probably removed from your vehicle by some government personnel. Maybe they thought that you were, had your family had experienced something that might have affected your neurons, a magnetic anomaly, something like that, because of the way we felt and what we heard and that kind of thing. So it was easier for them to go in a direction of, okay, well, you saw something off world. There's no question, because it was witnessed by so many people. But who actually removed us from the vehicle? It almost seemed to be something that they wanted to go in a direction of a military presence there. And in many ways, I think that's probably what happened. I think when we were extracted from the vehicle, that was probably human error, because my mother and grandmother were reversed. The ignition was turned off. I mean, does alien life know how to turn off the ignition of a Chevy station wagon? So it's
Yeah.
really hard for me to make sense out of that part of it. But what we saw was off-world. And so
Yeah.
to answer your point, to get to your point, the how I feel about it being inducted. Well, when my father lost his life at 54 years old on the anniversary of our case going before the UN, my brother and I thought, well, we need to bring attention to what happened to him because we knew as a family that something wasn't right.
Hmm.
And so by getting this validated by the state, the citations we got and being inducted into the state through, being that our restaurant had been proven to alter the natural progression of the community, like Billy the Kid altered the railroad, we were able to get our incident archived as historically true because it divided the community. But even however they wanted to go, whatever route they wanted to go to make that happen, it was a victory for us because we have been talking about this for so long. And if you had seen or been part of what we went through back in the day, the fights in school, the harassment my mother got, how we were lucky. A lot of people say we were lucky, and I think so too, to be able to go to my mother, go to my stepfather, go to my brother, and say, yeah, what happened? We're shaking, we're making sense of this stuff, right? We're kids, for God's sakes. But on, for us to also lay that on our parents when they too were going through a tough time and trying to
Hmm.
process what happened on top of being a mother and running a business and having to get up in the morning and deal with what we were going through at school. I mean, it
Yeah.
destroyed our family. I used to be an altar boy. It changed my vision. It changed my thoughts. Everything. I thought I was being lied to. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I used to sit on top of the stable of our house, which is still there, 1954, Boardman Street, on top of my parents' stable where they had the horses, and just look out over the scenery for miles. And always thought, well, I'm on the wrong path. Maybe I should have taken a right and a left. I mean, maybe what is it with my life that doesn't make sense? I don't feel I
Yeah.
belonged here.
Yeah.
And I would sit up there, and I'm talking when I was in fourth grade. I already
Hmm.
knew then that I was meant for something else, that this wasn't for me, that something was, I was
Different
meant to
off.
do
Yeah.
this or be part of something, and I didn't know what it was, and I'd be confused. And so to give you an idea how nervous and shaken I was as a child, my mother used to put us to bed and then come back in a second time just to say, okay, good night, give you a kiss on the forehead. I actually lunged up one night and stabbed her in the face with a fork. And this was in a documentary about 10 years ago. And I didn't really hurt her. I mean, as a kid, but I used to sleep with a fork.
Defend them
And
off.
um,
Yeah.
and I remember visions. I remember seeing visions of willow trees and multiple crafts and in my head. And one day my mother decides to go buy a willow tree and plant it outside my window. Although,
Great.
yeah, what was like, how did you notice? What made you do that?
Yeah.
And now, if you go to the UFO park, there's now willow trees which weren't there 10 years ago.
Hmm.
So it's like what I saw and what I was part of seems to have been jumped decades, and now what I saw is coming to
True.
life. Yeah.
That's so odd. Well, the thing is, they can say it's government employees all they want, but last time I checked, government employees do not look like 4.5 foot tall praying mantises. So that's a lot of baloney. Tom, we got a couple questions in the chat. James Maloney wants to know, you just talked about the emotional experiences. Did you experience any physical effects afterwards, like burns or sunburn? And I know on Uncovering Aliens, when we interviewed you, you got scoop marks and stuff. You've got some stuff. Any long-term effects physically from the
A
experience?
lot. Okay, so I have nerve damage. I've been dealing with that for most of my life. My eyesight has gone. I've got a weird eye disease, basically. So does Melanie Kirchdorfer, who I believe was part of this too. Whereas I can get an eye exam this afternoon, and that prescription will work for 2 or 3 weeks, and then my eyes will no longer adjust to that prescription. It'll change. And so right now, over on this counter over here, I've got about 5 or 6 different pairs of glasses, and on any given day, that prescription will work or it won't work.
Wow.
They refer to it as a lazy eye, but not like an eye that moves around. Just that your eyes will not accept proper sight once it's seen properly. Like these right here, these big freaking glasses I wear, I have to wear these. I have to wear this particular filter in here to block out blue light, infrared light, UV light, whatever. So my eyes are really bad. I've had 5 operations on my eyes. And
Wow.
then, yeah, I've got a scoop mark right there, which was, I think, in your Uncovering Alien show. My
Yeah.
brother
Yeah.
had
I remember
uh,
you showing me that. Yeah.
my brother had 2 puncture wounds, if you will, almost looked like a 1 centimeter snake bite behind the right
hmm
ear, and
hmm
2 more over his thymus gland. And the doctor that treated him, you know, was pretty adamant that that was where your brain would signal your body to produce more T cells. And back when you're a child, your body is producing T cells, which is what your body does to develop an immune system. And so
Yeah.
there was something to that as well.
They were curious about that then.
Yes, they were.
Ellen would like to know if there were any smells associated with the experience that you can recall. You're muted, buddy.
Yeah, I don't really remember anything as far as a smell goes, but there's it was a very humid, hot night, which is unseasonably hot. In September there, it's never like 90 degrees during the day. It was a super hot day.
Yeah.
And so there was something different about the day itself. And we were all tired and hot, and it was very buggy that night. Um, but as far as a smell, no, just a tapping sound. There was a rhythmic feeling, woo, 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 like that.
Yeah.
I had when I went to had an MRI, and a tap 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 of an MRI that triggers something with me too. I don't remember it, but it triggers. My hair will stand up. Uh,
Wow. Okay.
yeah,
So
so that
it's
tapping
similar to
sound.
the I sound that
I'm sorry.
thump 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 like a machine,
Yeah,
like a pump. Hmm.
I hope that helped answer that. But so there were a lot of signs that something was happening as far as a smell goes. Now, what else can I tell you? Well,
Actually,
the crickets,
Tom,
there were crickets and katydids and everything erupted. So what we were feeling, or what we were sensing, or what our brains were experiencing in our heads, if you will, as a family in this car, was not limited to the vehicle. It, it wouldn't affect the wildlife, if you will, was being as affected as we were. So it spread out, and so with that, um, yeah, there was a lot. There was more going on than pinpointing our car. I
Right.
think, being that we were almost in a diamond shape, right? So when we pulled up, when we were going through the bridge, and we had the white sphere to the left and the orange one to the right, and then the disc on the far, you know where that was on the road, Mike? If you put our car near that telephone pole, you would have had an object at 11 o'clock, another one at 4 o'clock, and then another one, the white sphere, back at the bridge a little bit more like at 7 o'clock. So there were 3 objects, and we were basically in the middle of this diamond. So if there was any communication going on, we were smack in the middle of it.
Now you also, I believe, related this heavy feeling that came down on you, not just the sound of being underwater, but I think you described a feeling like you would feel if you were underwater. This everything slowed down, and it sounds like the cicadas and the crickets and everything. It almost sounds like a suppression field came down over every living thing, and then maybe when they lifted that, they all went nuts because they'd been like held there for an hour or two, or however long this experience
Yeah.
took. And how describe that, and then quickly, how long did the whole thing last according to your clocks, according to the watches and stuff?
Well, you're right about that feeling, because my mother describes it as a tightness, and she did in Netflix, where she feels like we were almost like wrapped in like this invisible saran wrap or something. Like we couldn't
Mm-hmm.
take a big breath. I felt like I was somewhat almost paralyzed by it. I could move my head and everything, but I just felt like I was. It was almost like there was something holding me, and again, I could see my mother and my grand. I can still see it today. It's almost like a picture. I can see my mother and my grandmother, and I'm looking at them, and the whole car was so bright, but it didn't bother my eyes. I really couldn't move much. I don't know why I wasn't saying more. I had been looking out the window momentarily, and now I'm almost fixated in the back of the car, staring at the radio and the steering wheel. And then, like I said, then then there was all of a sudden this, frogs and katydids and everything just erupted. But to me, I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe because I was so in the state that we were all in the state, maybe it sounded louder to us because everything was so silent earlier, like being in a pool. All of a
Right.
sudden, bang, it's loud. So was it really that loud, or was it just because we were in this odd situation experiencing what we did? So there's a lot of I don't have the answers. Just because I was there doesn't mean I know. I can tell you what I experienced and what I think, and it's been very difficult to make sense out of it because I'm a very grounded person. But
Right.
what happened, and I've spent what 50 some odd years trying to get answers.
Yeah. And so this is interesting is as we were doing the Ancient Aliens interview and we walked over the bridge and then we started walking down the road that your family station wagon had gone down those 45 or 50 years before at that time. And I could feel you getting tense and tenser. And I could see it. And when we got down to right about the spot the car stopped, you didn't want to be there. I could tell you didn't want to be there. So what I want to ask you about with that is, and I remember that very distinctly from the interview, and I was really not happy that they cut a lot of that out. They cut that out so they could out of that episode so they could do a really bad interview. They cut 2 or 3 minutes out of it so they could do a really bad interview with Nick Pope on a case that was nowhere near as good as yours. That really got under my skin. It's like, really, you cut us for that? So when we got down there, you had this tense feeling. I could tell you didn't want to talk about it. I think there were other things involved with the experiment that you probably remember that I don't think you like talking about very much. And I'm not going to press you on those because you're my buddy and you haven't had a rum and coke yet today that I know of. So my question to you is when you think about those beings, the ones that you saw, the mantis types, and by the way, at the Roswell Museum in Roswell, New Mexico, if you get down there this year, there is a life-size replica of one of these things. When you think about them, what do you feel? If you had to say one word, what do you feel? Joy? Do you feel
Well,
anger? Do you
I
feel
also,
fear?
I say to myself, and over time, my opinions have changed. Like as I get more information, I think, okay, well, maybe this is, you know, uh, more in line with what really did happen. I've always said, and I've always felt this, and I don't know why as a child, I've always felt that these larger eyes, if you will, are lenses. I've always felt that, and if you go back and listen to an interview I did, 15, 20 years ago, I've always said they looked somewhat robotic. They acted in some type of odd manner.
Mm-hmm.
Their heads moved almost like a security camera would. Um, and so I look at what the work that Elon Musk is doing, Neuralink and things like that. I say to myself, we're already doing that. We're already making hybrid, if you will, or more technical beings. And so I believe what I experienced, what I saw was a live animal of some kind, but also part something else. It reminded me of an ant on two legs. The head of
Mm-hmm.
this thing was translucent like a red fire ant. It's hard to make that and put it in a museum, but the head of it was like the size of a football and was translucent. So it's always reminding me of a fire ant. And then my brother and I will have these conversations. Well, a 60-pound fire ant could carry a Volvo across the street because they could carry
Right.
100 times your weight. So if you were to tweak DNA, work in some type of a Neuralink type of thing where you can make all these frigging different species that you need to perform certain tasks, right? And I
Yeah.
also believe that the human the human race is probably the most advanced biological race in the universe, if not the multiverse.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's important if you are going to continue to evolve and add in to this, DNA, if you will, some type of a Neuralink type device where you can control and that kind of thing. So I'm wondering if we are needed to further a species because of our 140 IQ brain, which we're only using maybe 15 or 20% of. And
Right.
so if you can take out these stopping points, these governors, like take a child who, might be slower in school, right? Yet he can sit on a piano and listening to a song and bang out Beethoven the next minute on a keyboard. We are able to do so much more than
And we do. Yeah.
than we do. Just like if we were to be able to access the other parts of our brain and expand our abilities, I'd know what your credit card numbers are. I'd know, we would know too much about each other. So it has to be back down. But I'm wondering when it comes to, the future species, which are basically our ancestors, is that's what's happening. Are they using us to develop a higher or a better species and that kind of thing? And I do believe that. So when I saw what I did, as a kid, I'm thinking to myself, what is that, right? Is that person? But it would no way it could fit in a suit like that, right? So I knew something.
Right.
I ran. I mean, I was nervous about that.
Right. Right. So here's I want to get to this. I want to simplify this because I don't know if you remember the little bald British guy, Stephen Jones, who was in the cast of Uncovering Aliens. And I wanted to say that he passed away last Thursday, which is really made me sad, a week ago Thursday. And he's a very sweet man, but he was also an experiencer, and he'd been abducted, and he had gone through it his whole life. And he was, by the way, he's got a great book called An Invitation to the Dance. If you'd like to read that, go find it on Amazon. You can still find it. But Stephen was, oh, the aliens are wonderful, and they're here to help us in the next step of our evolution, and they're all peace and love and light. And one day, when we were working on the show after we shot your episode, we went to see another guy who'd been abducted. And Daryl Sims, who was in the cast, had this thing. It's like a police sketchbook, and it's got different alien heads and eyes and noses and mouths. And he kept flipping them and flipping them and flipping them with his one witness until he got to the right face. And the face was exactly like your mantis-like aliens. And then Mr. Peace and Love and Light, Stephen, got so upset, and you can find this episode on YouTube. He got so upset he had to leave the room and get away from the picture of it. So I don't think these mantis guys are good guys. And I've heard from other people say they're not good guys. So what I want to do is break this down for you, not to influence your answer, but I'm just going to give you 4 choices. You got to pick one of these 4 words to describe how you feel when you think about them. Okay. I'm going to give you mad, sad, glad, or scared. Which one of those 4 best describes how you feel about these things?
Scared.
Yeah. And everybody agrees with you that experiences them. So then that begins to raise, the issue of who are these beings and what are they really here for? And is there any good intention on their part towards us? And that's something that I guess that we're all still looking for. Got a couple more questions over here in the chat, if you don't mind, and we'll go through them. Andy says the scoop mark might be the location of an implant and wants to know if you've ever had an MRI or an X-ray of your body in that area, and have they shown anything unusual near the scoop mark?
No, but I did have, at one point I went to a MUFON conference symposium, and there were individuals there who had these scanners, and they went over my body. I'm not even sure what the equipment really was, but when they got to my forehead, it started to go crazy. As far as my arms go, no, there was nothing that, triggered anything. But it is kind of, the more I look at this, I mean, I've had this since I was a child, and it's never gone away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't even know if you can really see that. But
yeah, you don't remember where you go. I mean, I have a piece of a pencil in here where I stabbed myself with a pencil in 4th grade by accident. I was fooling around with it, and it jammed against the desk and broke off and got buried in there. I remember that. And that was not very painful by, comparison. So
yeah, you would think I would remember something that was that right. And I don't. And my brothers with the puncture wounds behind the ear and over his thymus gland.
Yeah.
So with that, and by the way, there's nobody else in our family that's bald. My brother and I lost our hair when we were 24, 25 years old. I mean, nobody else in our family, no one. And yet Matt and I, and here's something else people don't realize. It's not genetic. My brother and I are stepbrothers.
Yeah.
We had different fathers. He was born after my mother got remarried. And so it's not like there's a genetic, type of thing that came down from my father.
Predisposition. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're brothers, but you're not really brothers. So that is
Yeah,
pretty
well,
bizarre.
yeah.
And most ladies I've talked to like your head, Tom. They think your head is awesome with or without hair. So you're
There's
in
a joke
luck
there,
there.
but I'm not. This is a family show.
This
Hey,
is a family.
hey, can I jump in here for a minute? I want to say something, okay?
Yeah, sure.
So, I do want to mention this too. What bothers me, or what I'm now up against and trying to correct, is the rebranding of our family's incident, the Berkshires UFO.
Yeah.
So I want you to think about this for a minute. Our case was investigated for 3 years by the state of Massachusetts. Governor Charles D. Baker was involved. The lieutenant governor was involved. The Great Barrington Historical Society was involved. The state of Massachusetts Historical Society was involved. They investigated this case for 3 years, and they used an attorney. An attorney was involved by the name of Debbie Kessler. She actually went to the Roswell Museum, the research library, to help forward information back to the state of Massachusetts.
Wow.
And in doing so, they had to get these letters, the ones that they thought were relative, about the United Nations and General Assembly 33-426, was which our family went to went to the United Nations after the documents related to our case were signed off at a court. And the reason they had to be was that these documents had to go through a legal process so that they could be looked at or viewed as a source document. An historical society and a state can't induct something unless they can truly say these documents are legit. And since they couldn't find the originals, the attorney looked at those, investigated the signatures, the people were all real. I've got a video on that. And then they were able to sign off and say yes. And then it was sealed by a magistrate. And some of those were sealed by Kevin Titus. Other ones were sealed by an attorney within the court system here in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
Anyway, my point to all this is that all that information went back to the state. And in 33-426 was this idea of all our countries coming together to share their information together regarding the topic. And a lot of the documents that we had related to our family and what was going to be discussed goes back to 1974, where there was a slew of documentation of pilots not being able to fire on, UFOs, if you will, or UAPs, or, Foo Fighters, however they worded it. And so that was the information that was put forth. And in doing so, our case could not have been inducted into state without the paper trail involving our family, and also the connection to the space race.
Yeah.
So when they rebranded it the Berkshires UFO, it stripped all that away. There is no Berkshires UFO incident. So think about this. They took a case that has all this documentation, a paper trail, attorneys. My father was a politician. The Robert Blechman, who spoke on behalf of our case at the UN with Stanton Friedman and Linda Morton Howell, he was part of the Roswell Museum, and that's why you see a picture of him holding up our induction, because that's how we got into the museum. But anyways, there's an awful lot of people involved in this, a lot of big names. This was a very credible case, and by rebranding it to something else that doesn't have that paper trail, I think was wrong. The Berkshires UFO is just a name of a TV show. It's not the name of the incident. So if you go on a computer and you Google Berkshires UFO, there's nothing. It says there's no proof of anything. But if you go to our family's case, that's buried now. And yet there would be no Berkshires UFO incident if it wasn't for our family. So I don't understand why they would do that. It doesn't make any sense to me. Matter of fact, in the episode itself, Unsolved Mysteries, when they went to the police department and said, "Can you look up, what happened on this particular day?" "Oh, we don't see anything in here." That wasn't even the Sheffield Police Department.
Yeah, it was
a different police department.
They went to
So
the
not
Berkshires
only
Police
did they
Department.
rip all the information out of it, they also interviewed the wrong police department.
Yeah. It's let me just tell you, reality TV isn't very real, folks. I'll tell you that. Tom, I got some more questions. I want to get to them quickly here. Did you or anybody else in the family ever undergo hypnotic regression at any point concerning this event?
This is all conscious recall and has been since we were children. We talked about it in school. We got in fights
Mhm.
over it in school. My mother, at one point, we were getting picked on so much. My mother had got us like a bag and filled it up with clothes. And I was punching it as a kid because I'm always been small. I'm like 5'6". You know, in school, I was like 120 pounds. I was a punching bag. And so, yeah, so that was tough. And my brother got the blunt of it. He really did. My brother got more, had a harder time than I did, really.
Yeah, that's too bad. What about RH negative factor? I'm an RH negative. I don't know about you. Are you guys RH negative? And
I'm
are you
negative.
both
Nine of
type
us,
O?
nine
Oh,
of us in our family.
wow.
And
Okay.
back in the 60s, that's a really good question, Mike, because not only are we O negative, my body temperature runs almost 2 points below normal.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's
so
right.
not only that, but back in the 60s, anyone born there, if they were O negative, so back in the 60s during, NOM, if you had O negative blood, you were a universal donor. That information went directly to the service, the armed services.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, okay. All right. Marguerite says, regarding the feeling of exterior pressure, was there any experience of an air pressure change along with the silence, almost like a negative noise and a feeling of pressure? Anything like that? Air pressure change.
My brother and mother have always said that it felt like being in the middle of a hurricane where the
Mm,
barometric pressure changes. So while everything was taking place, there was a change. These changes of feeling confined, um, surreal, um, unable to move for a minute, the pressure around our bodies, the tapping sounds. There was a lot going on. Like from, I'd say like every 4 to 5 seconds, you felt differently. And yes, at one point, because my parents and everybody, lived in, Florida most of our lives, actually, we've experienced a lot of hurricanes and the barometric change of pressure. So
hmm.
yes, there was definitely, like to give you an idea, if you've ever been in a really bad storm or been in a hurricane, but when you're in the eye, it's less than still. It's like nothing. There's no breeze. There's no wind. There is no noise. There's no crickets. It's just you're in the eye of the hurricane. There is nothing. It's a nothingness. And that we felt.
Wow. That is an incredible description. Negative noise is what Marguerite is saying there. All right. Let's move on to, I was involved with you in the two shows that have done interviews with you. That's how we met, how we became buddies. The Ancient Aliens thing was good. I was just wondering, how do you feel about how they presented you? I mean, I felt like we left so much on the cutting room floor with Ancient Aliens, and Prometheus usually does a really great job. I was very disappointed in how they cut and how little they used of what we shot that particular day up there in Great Barrington. So, how do you feel about the coverage you've received with this case? And do you feel like it's ever been really fully told?
No, never.
Let's go tell it, right? Let's go
No,
tell the
I
story.
think if anything, I had used the term which piggybacks on your last question. I use the term vacuum of silence because that is how we felt it was like a vacuum in the silence. And that was left out of the show we did. As far as how they portrayed everything, in a lot of ways, Ancient Aliens did a pretty good job all in all. But so much was cut out and left on the cutting room floor that it really watered it down. And I think that's one of the things that really bothers me. It's like we've always stuck to our guns. We've always, gone forward and moved forward with documentation. These aren't stories. This is a true historic event. It needs to be treated that way. And for whatever reason, it's like the shows just they call me and they say, "Oh, we're going to make copies of this. We're going to show this. Make sure you've got a copy of that." And then the show comes out and they don't use it,
Yeah.
even though they're verified documents from the state and government, which is what I don't understand. Like, not a single show has ever told this honestly. They
Hmm.
sensationalize the parts that, like you, if you watch any one of these 5 or 6 documentaries that have been made, every one of them shows it differently because they use a different part of it. and you don't even know you're looking at the same show. So you can't do 10% of it. You can't do 20. You have to tell it from soup to nuts, or it doesn't make sense. The attitude and the way my mother handled things, it doesn't make sense if you don't know that she had seen this before. We didn't stop to look at the UFO on that dirt road because we never seen it before. We stopped because we never saw it so close.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We weren't scared of it because we had seen it so many times before. You know, people say, "Oh, I saw a UFO. I was terrified." Why? Was it shooting at you? Why would you be terrified of a UFO? But a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people might back in the day go, "Oh my God, what is that?" and want to get some distance from it. We drove to it because it wasn't the first time we had seen it.
Right. Now that brings me to the next question is that I know Matthew's continued to have experiences, and I'm not sure really about you now that I think about it, but you guys have had further experiences. I know he had we saw that there were some puncture wounds in his chest again. Later on, that had only happened a month or two before we shot Uncovering Aliens back in 2013. And so I want to ask you, have these experiences continued? And
Yeah,
you have a couple
yeah,
kids, if I'm not mistaken. You got a couple boys,
yeah.
right?
So
Have,
there was
have
a
they had any
in
experiences?
2000, in 2009, 2010. I had an experience which I don't talk about because I want to keep it simple, and I'm trying to make a point with
Right.
1969. My son, um, I had I had woken up one night, and this was right around the time just before we did the show, but I didn't discuss it. Where my feet were, my leg was. I was wearing sweatpants to bed, and I woke up. My legs were elevated up towards a ceiling fan over my bed. My pant leg was not sliding down, which it should have, because it wasn't like an elastic at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
I remember turning like I was going out a window. I was going over my tanning bed. I think you saw my tanning bed,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
was going out across towards a window. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was suffocating. And then I remember being back in my bed and hearing a scream from my son's room. Matter of fact, Lori Wagner and Yvonne Smith came to interview my son over it and filmed it.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I ran into his room, and he had a friend visiting who was laying on the floor next to his bed on like a throat, like a single mattress just thrown on the floor. And my son was like just sitting up in bed in a panic, and was speaking with him and his friend Thomas, by the way. They were like, a light came in the room. It was like a opening in the ceiling. My son felt like he was being taken through the ceiling. And so not only was my son shaken, but his friend, who was so shaken too, called his mother at like 3 o'clock in the morning to come pick him up because he was so scared of what happened. And this was in the house that you've been to, right
Yeah.
upstairs from this house right here.
Yeah.
And so then my brother, of course, had some activity with him. But if you look at the years when we had the additional activity, our kids were both around the same age. So it was when our children were turning 7 or 6 or 7 that this happened. So there seems to be a
Wow.
correlation between my brother's age. I was, 9 or 10, almost 10, and my brother was 6. So when our children reached that age is when we started to notice that they were having, experiences as well.
And have those continued into their adulthood, or have they stopped?
Well, there's been some interesting things. My son was tested at the sorry, my son was tested at the Knoxville Hypnosis Center, and had been they confirmed that he had a higher than coincidental chance when it came to a remote viewing and that sort of thing. So he
Yeah.
is showing signs of he was in the people to people. He was in the gifted program, so he beat an unbeaten chess pro when he was like in 5th grade. So he seems to have this mathematical ability that I don't have. And if you ever met his mother, you'd know he didn't get it from her. So, you know what I mean? I mean, he's like brilliant, and
Yeah.
yeah, very analytical. So he's showing signs, just as Matthew's son, builds, he's into computer programming and that kind of thing. So both in careers that they excel at, which they have abilities to really do well in those fields, and they're not anything that would have came from my brother or myself biologically, because it's not our strong point.
Yeah. Well, Aurelio, that's going to kind of, I think, wrap it up for me. I have to run off to the dentist, guys. Sorry, I had something fall out today. I got to get it put back in. So I've got a kind of an emergency thing. Tom, thank you for sharing the information. Is there anything anybody or you want to ask me about
I would like to
interviewing
ask you.
Tom? Or
I'd like to ask you a question, Mike.
all right,
Here's my thought on us as a planet and why we're here.
right.
We've had what, 5 or 6 global extinctions. We have basically 8.7 million species according to Wikipedia after
Mm-hmm.
5 global extinctions.
Mm-hmm.
Our Earth rotates on a unique axis, which it allows all these different species to thrive simultaneously that require certain environments to do that.
Right, right.
I don't see polar bears once being in Africa and making their way to, or lions, and what I'm saying, giraffes. They didn't come from somewhere else, and now they're in Africa. So my thing is, it looks like Earth is our galaxy's arc. It looks like there was an intentional, cleansing, and the dinosaurs could have made it impossible for humans to set up life here. So
Right.
they had to be extinct. And it was almost like it was, like they flushed it out and stocked it with what they wanted to survive because of the interest in these animals' abilities, which they can tinker with now and again develop certain species to their liking.
To improve the stock. Tommy, I agree with that. I mean,
Galaxies are. I'm sorry.
that's okay. I kind of agree with that. There was a great researcher who passed away, geez, 10, 12 years ago now, named Lloyd Pye. He wrote a great book called Everything You Know Is Wrong, Book One, Human Origins. And he was going to write more books, but he got cancer and passed away. But he calls it the cosmic dump truck theory. And what he talks about is how the Earth is this great place for all these different types of life to thrive because the climate is not monolithic. It does change. The seasons change. You can live at different latitudes and experience completely different ways of living and have completely different life forms. And he says, to him, as he looks at it, the most logical thing, if you look at the fossil record, is it looks like somebody was driving past Earth 500 million years ago and said, oh, this looks like a great place for life. And they just dumped a bunch of life on the planet in the cosmic dump truck theory. Let's see what happens here. And that's what they call the Cambrian explosion, because there's no lead up to any of these life forms. They just spring into existence out of nothing, and suddenly they're there. And that definitely implies an intelligent design or an intelligent intent in the placement of life on this planet. And when you think about it, we talk about the extermination of the dinosaurs and things like that. I'm a big advocate of what used to be called Dr. Tom Van Flander's exploded planet hypothesis. I think we can prove through a whole bunch of different aspects, a whole bunch of different points, data points, that there were 2 other large planets in this solar system, what they now call super Earths, one where the asteroid belt is and one where Mars currently orbits. And Mars was simply a moon of this super Earth. And somewhere along the line, both of those planets exploded or were exploded. And some of that debris came into the inner solar system and it struck the Earth and it wiped out the dinosaurs and changed the climate of this planet to make it possible for this higher form of life, the human race, and many, many other forms of life to flourish here. So I agree with your assessment on that 100%. And I'd like to go through and show you all the reasons why that's true. And it points to this being a big garden spot, a big place, a place of experimentation. Like, let's go stick this life here, see what happens to it, come back in a million years or every couple 100,000 years and see what they've developed that we can use to save ourselves. Because I think many of the other species that are out there, especially the grays, are dying. And that's why they're here, because they need us to save them. So I think your assessment is dead on, and it fits with everything I think I know about ancient history of the solar system. So great point, Tommy.
Thanks, buddy. Is that Lloyd Pye from the Star Child skull?
Yes, the Star Child skull, Lloyd Pye.
There's
And
more to that too. I can't believe that someone went out of their way to try to dismiss that.
well, and you know, there's certain things. I mean, he talked about he had the skull replica when I met him the first time, and he pointed me to little things inside the skull that had notches for tendons and things that were completely non-human. And you know, he had it covered. So that's a great book. If you guys can pick it up, it is a great book. It will teach you an awful lot, an awful lot. And you know, there are so many great people, researchers in this field that are no longer with us that we need to have back, and Lloyd's one of them.
Agreed.
All right, Tommy, thank you. And if you guys want to carry on without me, go ahead. There are some people asking about the 1966 incident. So, Tommy, if you want to talk about that, you go right ahead. I'm going to go off to be tortured for an hour and a half.
Hey, good luck, Todd. Good luck on your dental experience, Mike.
All right.
Thank you so much for being a part of this presentation.
Anytime. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Mike. Talk to you later, man.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, so we have a question from Andy asking about he would enjoy hearing about the 1966 experience.
Well, there were 66 and 67, and quite honestly, 67 was the one that made the newspapers. You know, that's something else I'd like to focus on 67 if that's okay with him, because 67 was an incident that took place right there in Sheffield again, and it's actually in the archives of the Berkshire Eagle newspaper. And if you were to, matter of fact, you know what? I think I might have sent that to you. Did I send you the 67 news article?
I'm not sure, but it's there on the link to
Okay.
this,
Right.
you know.
So this is a really good point. So 66, we had seen something, and yes, we talked about it in our restaurant. And of course, my family was a laughing stock of the town when we started talking about it. In 67, it took place again. Although, because there was already buzz about it, and people that had seen it before were also interviewed by the Berkshire Eagle in 1967. One of them was Zuko. The last name was Zuko. Peter Zuko was one of my best friends. And so the individuals that were interviewed in 1967 were also regulars in our diner. I think the point here, like Travis Walton knew who he was in his truck, right? We knew who was in our diner. The incident involving our family and or the Berkshires, now coined the Berkshires UFO incident, has to do with our diner in Sheffield. It's all about the diner, the conversations in the diner, what took place in the diner, because there's an awful lot that I'm also not sharing with you because I can't right now. But those conversations obviously went to the UN later and caused the passing of my father at 54 years old. So to make this short, what was also happening in and around the area was not just beating Russia to space and building capacitors. They were making weapons too. So there was an awful lot going on at the manufacturing facilities in and around the area. And so that was all part of this. Anyway, back to 1967, there was already talk going on in our diner. And at the time, the there were, just like you or me or anybody watching this podcast or interview, there's a handful of people that know what's going on, and then you've got a lot of the individuals who live in town, and they're just not buying it. They got a different mentality, and they'd rather poke fun at somebody than really get to know them and talk to them. And so that's what we were dealing with, and that's why our diner started to go out of business. My mother was struggling because of what happened in 67, because now our friends and those who worked in our diner and ate there every day had also witnessed something. And so that's when times got tough. But it did make the newspapers, and I can show you I'll give you a copy of that article. And so between 67 and 69 was when our life was hell. The fights, the problems. It wasn't at 69 isn't what caused the problems for our family. That put a bow around it. That helped, because all these other people had seen it now too. And we're on the radio and everything else talking about, hey, we're sorry we treated you like that, but it was a little too late. We had already decided to move to Connecticut. So 67 to 69 was when our lives were absolutely horrible. The off-world incident was nowhere near as trying as the on-world incident that followed by the locals and our so-called friends. We were ostracized, but we were also not from Mass. We were from New York. So we were from New York, moved to the Berkshires. When people said, "Oh, you can't talk about the UFO thing here. We can't, this is not, something we want to talk about," because of the space race was active in the area, you couldn't talk about things outside, at a supermarket or at lunch, because they were sworn to a secret space program. They were working on a secret space program. So you couldn't just talk openly about it. But my mother would say, "I don't care what, we'll lock up. You guys can, have the restaurant, drop some quarters in the jukebox, listen to the Stones, and talk about what you need to talk about. I'll make some fries. You guys want a burger?" Because my mother also needed to make money, because we were losing money on the other side of this whole problem we had, because we were being blackballed by a lot of locals. So when you've got 5 or 6, dozen people from Sprague Electric and everything else that just came from the horse track, they want to spend some money and have some food and talk about things. Sure, it's your place. We'll turn the key, we'll lock the door, and it's yours as long as you want it. And so that's how our diner became significant. But it was also not because of the space program, the goodwill message that was left on the moon. Those people who made that and forged it ate in our diner, knew my family. And so here you are talking about the medallion, a calling card. Did that cause them to come back? Why did we have sightings right here in our own backyard after that was placed on the moon? All kinds of theories and ideas. Over the French fries, my mother used to deep fry in bacon fat. So that's our case. Did Unsolved Mysteries mention any of that? No. It was a travesty. They sold it out.
Thank you. Thank you for enlightening, all of us on that, because I think a lot of us did not know what you and your family have gone through, especially from 66 to 69. And that really fills in a lot of holes in your family's
Thanks. Yeah.
experience. Is there any other questions? I know we're kind of going on the hour and, 10-minute mark here on our talk with Thom Reed. So if you have any questions in regards to that, to Tom, please type it in the chat. We do have James saying that you should be writing a book on this, Tom. If you haven't considered that yet, that should be.
Actually, I am writing one now. I kind of have to preserve it, because and I have a it's been I've been out of school a long time, right? And so I got run-on sentences and everything else. But
There are
I am
editors.
documenting what I actually started to write it in the 80s when my father was taking us to the UN in 92. And so I have a lot of that, which is good reference, because as time goes on, you kind of forget little things and you go, "Oh my God, that's right, I remember that now." But I am writing one, and to be honest with you, my co-author is the Roswell Daily Record newspaper. So Toby Martinez, that works with the Roswell Daily newspaper, is kind of my editor for my book. And so they're supporting me 100%. Again, because the Roswell Research Library played a part in our case being inducted. So that's why I'm kind of got this in with the city of Roswell, the town of Roswell, and the museum. So, and they did a great article on it. It's if you just type in THOM, that's how I spell my name, Thom, right? THOM Reed, Roswell Daily Record, you can see the article. And so yes, Toby is my co-author, and we are writing a book. I've probably got 20 something chapters started. And the only reason I'm actually doing it now is because so much continually gets left out. And, if they're not going to do a program or a documentary that tells us honestly, then at least I should have a book like you had mentioned. I do need one, because it's, not only is the documentation ripped out of a lot of this stuff, but then you incorporate police departments saying we don't see anything when it was the different town. You'd be surprised how many people actually look at a documentary and go, "Oh my God, so now I know what's going on." You'd be surprised how wrong they are. I'll never watch Unsolved Mysteries again after what they did, because it was obvious that. So I think the point with Unsolved was that it's an unsolved case, right? So when they did our documentary or show, if you will, or episode, it was already decided what it was. So how could it be an unsolved UFO sighting if they already identified it as a UFO? So maybe that was it. But you're absolutely right. It needs to be documented to preserve what really happened.
Well, I'm glad that you're actually working on it, and hopefully it'll get done soon. Believe me, there's a lot of help out there, with, ghostwriters, editors and everything. So that,
Yeah,
and
it needs to be
have like,
told first person. And
yeah,
the other thing too is MUFON played a part in this. The Robert Blechman, who took this before the United Nations, was the public relations director for MUFON. So our case is tied to our case that went before the United Nations, was mentioned and became part of that symposium because of MUFON. We didn't know what MUFON was in 1992. I had no idea what MUFON was. Robert Blechman lived in Manchester, Connecticut. He had a law firm on Broad Street and knew my father. And so when he was looking into the Hudson River Valley sightings, he had thought to himself, well, there was this case in Sheffield, Great Barrington, which was also over a body of water, the Housatonic River. So could have what happened in the Housatonic kind of moved over towards the Hudson River, not that far away. And so the reason our case got involved was to see if that was a possibility, if what had happened on the Housatonic had kind of made its way to the Hudson. And of course, being that, there was a lot of, talk about our restaurant and the space race and all that, he thought he would just use this as a supporting mention on behalf of the Hudson River. And that's how it got to the UN.
wow. We have one more question, final question for for Tom for today. From Mike, do you feel like you're part of a cosmic family with hybrid children or relatives that our alien have fostered, in addition to your children being potentially enhanced with some sort of abilities?
Okay, another good question, because being someone who tries to be very level-headed about this, I say to myself, "Oh, I don't know," you know, and then the part of me that reflects on everything I've experienced, I'm going, "Absolutely." So there's a, I look at, you know, uh, our bodies run at a different temperature. Let's start with that. So let me go back. Let me circle back for a second. I'm going to word it this way. We've got 8.9 million animals or species on this planet after 5 global extinctions. Why is it that humans, right, there's no variation? Of course, there's variation of human race. And I think that answers this question, because I think that there are multiple uh, offspring or differences in the human race. Why would my body temperature run 2 points below normal, and most people with O negative blood, if there wasn't a different version of the human being? You have different versions of dogs, horses, all these different animals, right? Why is there only considered to be one human? Why would your blood type control your entire body's temperature just because it's O negative? It shouldn't. And yet, I think those with O negative blood, there's a talk of a vertebrae, a difference in a vertebrae. I can take hot and cold better than most people. Like when I'm in Florida, I can walk around Miami in a suit jacket and I'm not hot, which is weird too. But my body temperature also runs 2 points below normal. So I'm sure there's a correlation between the two. And then you've got 9 members of my family are O negative and A negative. All my whole family's basically RH negative. Not so much O, but my father was, I am. My brother's A negative because of a different father. But then again, when you look at the O negative factor, I mean, there's more to it than just a blood type. When you can there's no trace to the monkey, right? There's no point of origin for O negative blood. There's no point of origin. And if we all came like Adam and Eve, if you believe you go down that road, if we had all been, spawn or what have you, we'd all have the same blood type. If 2 people had children, they don't have the same blood type. We don't. There's multiple blood types, multiple body temperatures. My son came up with a mathematical equation that nobody else knows how to figure out. I can do it with you right now over the. Want to do something that is going to blow your mind? You got a pen? You got a calculator? We'll end it with this, okay? You got a calculator?
Let me see.
All right, this is going to be great. So my son came up with this in 5th grade. And to this day, nobody knows how he does it. But we cannot get it coined, or we can't get a rights to it unless we copyright it as for entertainment purposes, because it only works like 99% of the time. But you
Okay.
ready? You got your calculator?
Yep.
Okay. Take 3 or 4, numbers like 5, 7, 6, whatever. Just write 4 numbers down, 4 individual numbers down.
Okay.
And let me ask you this: what do you think's harder, subtracting or adding?
Subtracting.
Then we'll do a subtraction. So start with a high number, like 5916 or something like that. And while everybody's online, let's see if they can figure this out, because I couldn't believe it. This is crazy.
Okay.
You got 4 numbers?
Yep.
All right, rearrange them to make a smaller number using the same ones. We'll keep it easy. So whatever 4 numbers you used, rearrange them to make a smaller number.
Okay.
And then subtract it. Don't tell me any of the numbers you used. Subtract it, right? You have a high number, you're rearranging them, make it a smaller number, and you're going to subtract, right?
Okay.
You got an answer?
Hold on a second.
Okay. Double check the math, because if it's not right.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so how many in the answer? 3 or 4?
The answer is
No, don't tell me what the numbers are. How many in the answer?
there's 3.
3. Okay, right. Okay, so give me 2 in any order, and I'll tell you what the third one is.
9, 9.
Wow. It's either a 0 or a 9.
It's 9.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. Like I said, it worked. Yeah. My son came up with that when he was in 5th grade. He can do it with like 20 to 30. It doesn't even matter. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty
So
cool.
he doesn't know what numbers you start with, what numbers, you subtracted with, or even the numbers in the order that they come out. And he can. That was a weird answer. 999.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. You almost got me. Had to be one or the other. Yeah, it was either on top or the bottom, Yeah.
So, okay, Tom, we're going to call it a night, so to speak. So thank you so much again for being a part of our UFO conference. Please be sure to go visit Tom's UFO Park up in Sheffield, Massachusetts. I'm sure you're going to have a great experience, or an unusual one at to say the least. And again, Tom, as part of the Danbury Library, my name's Aurelio Muraca. And on behalf of the Friends of the Danbury Library, we thank you for once again sharing your experiences and your story with us for our community. And to all of you, thank you so much. Please support our UFO conference. Come tomorrow to the Danbury Library. We're going to have a couple of great people come in person. So show up. It's not going to be virtual. Come in to the Danbury Library tomorrow. And
Yeah,
until then,
thanks. I loved it, man. Thank you for having me.
anytime, man. Always, you're always welcome.
Thank you, man. See you next year.
Yes. See you next year.
All right, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.